Chapter 14. The Clone Reaper and Robotards. The entire district heard about Dante's bold power move by mid-afternoon, but most orphans didn't even take their eyes from the replay of Ashley's fights. By the end of the day, Ashley's incredible win had been played on screens all around the world. Many of her old classmates were longtime fans of the underground fights. They informed the rest of their peer group that apparently Ash had quit school to begin a career as a pit fighter. This, of course, seemed like a logical and enviable pursuit to the average teenage male. They vividly remembered and retold Jeff's stories about his older sister. The fights were hosted at a secret location and broadcast on an open channel, their origins scrambled by a beautiful array of hacked sub-channel protocols. Neither the footage, the date timestamp, not even the dialogue offered the slightest clue as to the event's location. The story wanted to be told, and the lack of details only fueled people's curiosity. District 13, home to many of the most dangerous juveniles on the West Coast, also provided residency for a long-flowering computer science department. This was due, in part, to one of the science instructors having himself once been an orphan resident of the district. With a compassionate heart and a keen understanding of what kids really needed to know to survive, he modified his classes accordingly. The report of Dante sucker-punching Mongo with a metal spike was indeed news, but you couldn't play it over and over again in slow motion, from any of 24 angles. In addition to being captivating and beautiful, Ashley's recorded performances had an interesting sociological effect. Her tremendous upset had kids everywhere standing up to bullies, believing they could win too. Outside, in the crisp afternoon air, after a morning of watching her fight over and over again, kids everywhere glowed with confidence. All over Angel City, bigger kids, used to bullying their juniors, found themselves outnumbered and violently confronted by the docile cowards they heretofore pleasantly bruised every day of the year. By sunset, many such bullies sported glistening new black eyes, split lips, or bloodied noses. On the district, the linchpin of power that was Big Mo became clearly represented in the breakdown of a dozen truces he'd arbitrated. The balanced threat, presented by the partnership between Mo and Lethal, had been the sustaining force behind several ceasefires. The dragons and the blades exploded into warfare by dinner time. It began when a couple of isolated dragons found themselves cornered by a dozen blades. Their bodies had been stabbed at least 100 times each, the blades' offensive signature. The dragons, following their time-honored tradition of arson, burned the blades out of their rec rooms and dorms, taking no prisoners. Martial law was soon declared, if only to better facilitate the emergency crews tasked with extinguishing the roaring fires. The blades simply carried the fight to the Dragon's Block, plunging half the district into uproar. The guards pursued both gangs, indiscriminately throwing them into the same holding cells, again relocating the fighting and murder from one block to the next. The athletic complex served as the district's main hub. The other sections were anchored to its perimeter. Together, their combined gravity drives kept them aloft and fixed in their assigned piece of the Angel City airspace. The bottommost layer of the complex was composed almost entirely of playgrounds and forested parkland. A winding river ran through the level, replete with a waterfall and diving points. The Iron Fist owned the lower levels exclusively. Like many places on D13, regular guard patrols hadn't set foot there in countless months. A large number of the gang had given themselves to outdoor living and set up semi-permanent campsites on the lower level. On this particular evening, the kids set up a fire on the exposed shoreline. They also made use of half a dozen park grills, cooking all afternoon. Celebrating like never before, the victorious orphans bribed a couple guards and looted a cafeteria of its wealth of fruits, vegetables, high-quality chicken and steak, along with a small fortune in snacks and junk food. The barbecue left everyone stuffed. By evening, they were roasting marshmallows over a cozy fire at a bend in the river. The low rise above the river offered a perfect view of the setting sun in the distance. Everyone settled into comfortable spots around the fire, with plates of food and dessert. Ashley never got the whole story of how they'd gotten their hands on an entire cafeteria's worth of food. They explained that the power vacuum had freed up lots of resources. Ashley was amazed at how well they could answer her questions without revealing anything questionable. Tanaka had taken up security duties, and while there was often a crowd around Ash and Jeff, they were always known and trusted friends. The guards stayed away. The devils, the dragons, and the blades stayed away. From their vantage point on the AC, the athletic complex, the Fist watched a bolt burn as power struggles gave way to murder and arson. Ashley looked around, naming all the new names in her head. Of course, Sky and Jeff were both in arm's reach, followed by Kaz, Hambone, Rudy, Taylor, Oddball, Big Chris, Tanaka, Poison, Jones, Rebound, and Rain. Outside that immediate circle, there were younger members of the gang, older than Jeff, and mostly unknown by name, but Ash recognized their faces. In a quiet moment, Ashley cleared her throat. The circle hushed. Ashley leaned forward. Heads turned with her. "What's the deal with this place? Why is it so unfixable?" she asked. That's easy, darling. Negative turnover," Oddball replied. "No doubt." Others nodded and murmured affirmations. "Bad pastry?" Ash grinned. Their smiles faded. Jones leaned forward. "Nah, girl, here's what it is. We got 10K in the mix, right? That's about all the damn time. That's 10,000. Ashley was listening. Everyone was listening. 1,500 citizens here every night, 2,500 during the weekday and 1,800 on the weekends. Now let me introduce you to turnover." "Best explanation I ever heard," Big Chris interrupted. Jones shot him an evil eye but smiled. "Citizens have a balanced turnover. They come and go, but their numbers always stay the same. That's balanced, equal. For us, is negative. Kids come in about one a day. Average, half of that leave, maybe less than. That's negative turnover. That's why you can't change shit here. How do you try? Sooner you're in the negative." Oddball spoke up. "Turnover's another way of saying meat grinder. Kids vanish, and it ain't cool. We know lots of zeros escape, but we also know some get poached. Paramilitary teams come in at night. Sometimes the guards work with them," Chris added. "And if you bite it in conditioning, that's a hard landing after a long fall," Jones added. "Plus the old-fashioned suicide." Kids were quiet for a second. "Tell her about the witch." "That's just a horror story to scare little kids," Chris asserted. "Fuck you," Tanaka's girlfriend Rain said, sitting up. "I saw her." "And then we never saw Jessie again," her friend Poison added. Yeah, Chris waved them off. Heard all about it. Rudy chimed in from beneath his hat. "I saw it too, Chris. That psycho bitch is for real. I didn't see her stealing no one, but she was 100% K-Ray-Zay." "From the man in the hat," Chris retorted. "What about my hat, asshat?" "Well, what about the Robotards and the Clone Reaper?" Oddball asked Chris. Robotards? Do I even want to know?" Ashley asked. "I want to know. Tell me," Jeff said. "Where's Drews? Should let him tell his own story," Tanaka said. "I can do the Reaper half. That's easy," Chris offered. Everyone quieted down and Chris repositioned himself, sitting a little higher, the firelight playing across his features as the last of the sunlight faded from the sky. "Basically, here's the deal on District 13. You gotta watch your shit. You gotta watch your six. You don't look anyone in the eye if they ain't in your set, and sometimes not even then. A good rule of thumb is the arm's reach rule." Several kids laughed and joked. "Oh boy, here he goes." Chris smiled. Considering how those jerk-off citizens like to swing their gay-ass little batons around, this one carries special weight here. He waited for the crowd to settle a little more. "Here's the deal. If it ain't in arm's reach, it ain't a problem." Oddball and Jones knocked their fists together. Several kids seemed highly amused, but Ash didn't really get it. Chris waved his hands, quieting them down. Okay. The story of the Clone Reaper goes like this. If you see yourself out in a crowd or in an abandoned hallway, within a couple days, you disappear or die in some horrible way. Everyone was quiet in the lee of his words. Digestion and the setting sun worked their drowsy magic on the children. "I myself don't know anyone that's happened to," Chris followed up. Ash looked around at the gathered kids. Their faces confirmed their belief in the myth. "It's not that we believe in it, but I don't know," Poison said. "Do you know people it's happened to?" Jeff asked. "Yes," Poison answered, her gaze falling to the ground, unwilling to elaborate. Dante stood next to Mo's bed, reading from a clipboard, outlining his next few operations. Severely doped up, it was obvious that Mo understood none of what Dante was telling him. Dante ignored the foam at Mo's lips as long as he could. Finally, he got a piece of tissue and wiped it away. Disgusted, he left the medical ward. The governor, Miss Agatha Dorchester Mame, lived aboard the old Victorian-style orphanage, anchored at the district's northwest corner. She occupied the penthouse suites, 3 of them, by herself. The governor was an avid cook. She hummed in her kitchen as she prepared a new recipe. A terrified child cowered, tied up in a tiled corner over a drain. Whenever the girl became lucid, she would cry and scream into her gag, often going hoarse, staring at the bandaged stumps where her legs should be. Usually Governor Mame relished these kinds of cries, but this had gone on too long, even for her. At the moment the child was awake, cooing as if with a baby. Governor Call Me Auntie Mame raised the instant camera and snapped a photo of the young orphan. She leaned in with massive steel scissors and snipped a lock of hair from the child's horrified brow. Dr. Malice drifted through the ward and looked at medical charts. He walked up to a little boy, smiled and double-checked the chart. The boy was connected to an IV. The doctor removed a syringe from his pocket. He inserted the needle into the port on the IV, depressed the plunger, and removed it, smoothly. He waited. Over the next 12 seconds, Dr. Malice watched the child suffer horribly and then die. He wrapped the syringe in plastic and slowly wandered away in his silent hospital sneakers. Later, in his office, the doctor removed the needle from the syringe and stuck it into a white foam cactus sculpture on a shelf. The white sphere was half filled with needles. Dozens of cacti lined the walls and shelves of the closet, all together bearing hundreds of needles. Across town, a gardener planted a flower. He was thick, quiet, and nearly featureless. His eyes were narrow and small, as were his lips and nose. His hair was nondescript, brown, and cut close to his head. A man-made irrigation system ran under the flower bed among the dirt. Below the irrigation system, a low room held several large clear glass enclosures. The roots of the plants above wound down into the enclosures, each of which held a human corpse. On the wall, a chart explained which corpse produced which flowers. On the campground level of the athletic district, the sky was dark, punctuated by stars and moon, obscured by the smoke of the campfire and the massive levels overhead. There are some theories on the clones. The most convincing are the head pennies and the robotards. Have you heard of head pennies? Oddball asked Ash and Jeff. I've heard of them. They say it's harmless, Jeff replied. Just a beryllium buildup between the base of the skull and the first vertebrae. Just a side effect of life in the anti-gravity world, right? Supposed to be harmless, Oddball laughed. You know, they think there's a way to read the electrical charges that are naturally stored in the metal. I saw it on Science World. They think they can decode it. We're talking visual data, oral data, digits and codes, lots of codes. Text, passwords, addresses, phone numbers, bank accounts. Did I say passwords? Your entire memory, everything, your whole life, back to front is stored in there waiting to be downloaded onto someone's system. Right now, it works with some people, not on others. They say all they have to do is fine-tune it. See what could happen. A guy gets killed, a skull ripped off. The robber downloads the combination to the family jewels. So if Science World is doing an episode on this, is someone going to tell me that the GOV hasn't already got a handle on this potato? And where better to experiment than on a pirate island full of cast-off zeros, hiding in plain sight? Elementary, baby. This is also where the clones come in, Chris interrupted. That which can be downloaded from must also be able to be uploaded to. That's just logic. Oddball tapped the side of his skull. Was that in the show? Uploading? Ash asked. I don't know. I didn't see the whole thing, Oddball answered. Anyhow, Chris explained, the robotards are true, and they're weird for sure. When we were just kids, me and one of my friends, Drews, he's a lawyer now. Anyhow, we discovered this special ed wing while we were looking for an open port where we could get picked up by the auto taxis. The rules were a little more lax back then, and we were making runs out to Springdale Mall. fetching Cinnabons and Mega Warriors and shit. We were making mad cash. Haha, Mega Warriors? Ash laughed. Like I said, mad cash, Chris asserted. Remember Captain Savage and the Marines of the New Republic? Several of the boys burst into song, a few lines of an ancient tune that had long ago been converted into a Marine chant and inserted into the theme of a show. If you see me coming, better step aside. A lot of men didn't and a lot of men died. One fist of iron, one fist of steel. The left don't get you, then the right one will. They burst into cheers and laughter. Cries of iron fist shouted into the darkening twilight. Deep in the back rooms, at the far end of the bolt, was the morgue. Lethal's post-autopsy body lay on a table. Morgenstern stood, holding a communicator to his ear. A thin, disabled man, Dr. Cedric Bergstrom, opened the door and limped across the crowded room. Carried a leather doctor's bag, clutching it to his chest, as he awkwardly worked himself past the sheet-covered bodies. He looked sick, drawn. This better be good. Cedric sounded rushed. Morgenstern laughed at the irony of Cedric trying to hurry. He gestured to Lethal's sheet-draped body. Cedric dragged himself over to the table and pulled back the sheet. Morgenstern was still messing with his comms unit. Allow me to introduce you to Robert Leland Kidd, he said over his shoulder. Cedric looked over the cadaver. He traced the faint autopsy scars with a bony finger. What is this, a superficial autopsy? He asked. Not at all. I was in there for quite a while. Gave him a full overhaul. Top-of-the-line upgrades. Recovery rates astonishing. Morgenstern pointed out the cables running from Kid Lethal's hands. He's only been plugged in for 8 hours. Cedric produced an electromagnetic scanning suite from his bag. Helmet, goggles, and handheld focus controls. He donned the headgear, triggered the scanner, and jerked as if struck, shaking his head in disbelief. He checked the settings on his equipment. All correct. Put the goggles back on. Lethal's body glowed with a solid blue, luminous life energy. What is it? Morgenstern asked. It's like looking at live electricity. Living nitroglycerin. He's on fire. Marking well above 200. I'll have to recalibrate. Cedric pulled the helmet off and messed with the controls. I've never had to recalibrate before, he mumbled to himself with astonishment. Morgenstern stepped closer to the table. Static shock, and we've got a walker. Talk about a diamond in the rough. He might even be able to talk. Over 200? You sure? Maybe 220, 250. He was right under your nose all this time. You're slipping, my friend. Cedric turned back to his inspection. So blue, he said, staring through the goggles. He's blue? Morgenstern asked. Bright. Who did this to him? A girl. A slip of a girl. Standing on the shore glowing like an atomic bomb, and he doesn't even have 2 pennies to rub together. Kid Lethal, his recently recharged mind, stood in the pit, staring at his blood-soaked hand, the moment before he fell. The kids huddled around the campfire. It crackled and laughed, taunting them. Chris kicked at it and fed it a couple more logs. Poison and Rain had gone for blankets and now returned, passing them out to everyone. Ashley suspected the girls had full proper names, like Skylar Macbeth, but she didn't know them. After all, she was Ash. She laughed to herself. She fit right in here. These kids were all like her. They were all on their own. Suddenly she felt the slightest twinge of remorse for having elbowed Dante in the face. Then she remembered his little speech about gang raping her and put him out of her mind. Chris continued. So anyhow, me and Drews, we found this wing. 6 ports, no guards. It's down on the north side of the old orphanage. It's stuffed. 5 floors of retards. It's the special ed wing. And out in the back, the way back, there was this attached section. We could see it when the taxi would pick us up and drop us off. It was bolted on, behind where the ports were, invisible to almost everything. Every time when we came back, we saw this thing, and Drews got all curious. Wanted to go down and see what's what. So we thread our way down. It took a while, because we had to dodge a dozen wired checkpoints. And we're climbing through ceilings and shit, and all he kept saying was, anything this secret has to be worth seeing. So we kept going. And sure enough, we get in, and it's all handicapped kids upgraded with military biotech stuff. When we come back, and the name Robotard's stuck. PDQ, we realize we have to go back for some snaps and be called liars every time we open our mouths. So we grab our camera gear and we go back. We get in, smooth, take tons of pics. We even get a grip of video. On our way out, everything's quiet, only this time, they're waiting for us. Caught us red-handed. Caught us deliberate. They took our gear and we got a month of conditioning. And you never went back? Ash asked. After a month at the Big C, you don't leave your bed for 6 weeks. What's conditioning? Torture designed to make you more cooperative, Oddball answered. I tell you, after that, I didn't even think about it. No one asked me about it. It took me almost a year just to talk to Drews again. But nowadays, everyone's heard about it. Some went in search of, some came back, some didn't. All I know is I've never seen a photo, not even the ones I took, Chris said. The fire was burning low. After a long silence, Ashley asked, Why didn't you guys escape? 'Cause escaping is the easy part, Chris answered. It's tough out there if you ain't a citizen, Jones said. No shit, food ain't free, Rebound agreed. Even bad food is better than going hungry, Oddball contributed. We've all done our time in the street. This is better and worse. The devil you know instead of the one you can't see coming. The kids murmured affirmations and slowly drifted off to sleep. Ash noticed that Jeff had stayed quiet most of the night. She couldn't help but think he was more than a little afraid. Those were her last thoughts until morning. Far from the orphans, Angel City traffic drifted along, overhead, to the sides, and below the district. Beyond the traffic, the stars could be seen, if one looked hard enough. One of the glittering traffic stars, Morgenstern, let the computer navigate his black sedan. Flowing along with the current, he fiddled with the radio, scanning the frequencies for something interesting. It was a drum solo he settled on. In the district security command center, Warden Keller sat in a central chair. The wall before him displayed 512 camera feeds from all over the district. He watched the emergency response crews suppress the fires while the guards suppressed the Zeros who caused them. A young lieutenant entered and saluted. Reporting is ordered, sir. The colonel ignored the salute and gestured to the big board. Look at this, Lieutenant. Madness. Chaos. What are we going to do? Calling the Ultraforce, sir. We are the Ultraforce here, son. Yes, sir. Lieutenant Werther, is it? You're with the Judge Advocate's office. You're an assistant prosecutor? Yes, sir. Son, I need you to build me a case against Ashley Fox. I want a warrant with solid grounds for arrest. Schedule a hearing for Tuesday morning. Deliver it all to me here, before dawn. Understand? What's the charge, sir? The young officer asked. You know who I'm talking about? You saw the fights? Yes, sir. Everyone's seen them. Want her charged with the murder of Robert Leland Kidd. And, Lieutenant, make the premeditation stick. Yes, sir, Werther answered. It was after midnight when Morgenstern anchored his car at the service entrance of an upscale estate. He bounded over a gate and into the grounds. He heard the dull roar of construction machinery. Something loud and heavy was running somewhere on the property. The ex-soldier silently moved along the side of the house and through the back of a beautifully sculpted garden. He found an unlocked door and slipped inside. Morgenstern moved through the first floor of the house. Most of the large rooms were open, the stone decor flowing seamlessly from one into the next. He smiled at the traditional household objects, rendered in varying shades of light pink to dark red stone. A series of glass doors opened onto an outdoor patio, replete with a kiln and a variety of pottery tools. Ahead of him, an older man worked a noisy cement mixer. His back was to the house. Several large plastic bags were clustered nearby, filled with blunt, wet-looking objects. Human limbs protruded at awkward angles from the bag closest to the resident. The man fed the cement mixer with body parts from the bags. Morgenstern stepped quite close and set an envelope on the stone floor. Over the sound of the cement mixer, the owner had no idea he'd been so thoroughly compromised. Morgenstern enjoyed the moment and silently moved over to a nearby picnic table. He took a seat and made himself comfortable. After watching the resident feed 3 arms and 2 legs to the mixer, Morgenstern checked his watch and cleared his throat. The mason sat up straight. He slowly turned to face the intruder. The leather-clad giant seated on the picnic table raised a finger to his lips. He then gestured to the envelope on the floor. The mason picked it up. He opened it and removed the flat, square piece of paper. You are cordially invited for an evening of conversation and refreshment amidst a gathering of your peers. A date, time, and address lined the bottom of the invite. The stonemason looked up, but Morgenstern had already let himself out. Not a terribly difficult trick over the sound of the cement mixer. Chapter 15. Keep Moving. Monday morning, September 19th, 2310. Ashley and Jeff had fallen asleep next to a log. Kaz, Sky, Hambone, and the fire all slept nearby. Ash sat up, hyper-alert. Jeffrey was violently thrown to the ground. He woke in time to catch himself and mumbled her name. The syllable barely escaped his lips before her hand clamped over his mouth. Early morning fog covered the level. Ash couldn't see more than 10 feet away. Kids slept all around them. She heard the water of a stream flowing close by but couldn't see it. Ashley crouched perfectly still, listening, her eyes closed, her head loose on her neck, her mouth slightly open. Jeffrey copied her. They heard it, the tromp of booted feet, the approaching sounds of big, heavy men, the unmistakable rattle of metal against metal, leather and cloth. Then they heard others, even closer, stealthily moving toward them. In a flash, Ashley was running. Jeff found himself dragged across the leaf-strewn ground. The cops were all around them now, yelling and shouting. The other orphans also began to rise, always ready for fight or flight. The cops tried to get a handle on the quickly deteriorating conditions, but their radio chatter gave away the nature of the chaos. "Who is that running? Is that her? It looked like 2 people. Who are we looking for? What do we do about this goddamn fog? Whose idea was this in the first place? Stop her! Stop her!" Ash sprinted through the mist, using her brother as a counterweight for her more extravagant moves. Then one of them tried to stop her. Ashley kicked out his knee. He screamed and fired his riot gun into the air, waking everyone. In the fog, Jeff only caught glimpses of the guards in their heavy gear. Helmets, face shields and gas masks, riot shields and less lethal tasers and pellet rifles. The dense fog also obscured the vision of the armored soldiers, slowing their assault. Their hearing was hampered by their helmets and masks. Throw in the aural confusion of the radios built into their helmets and they may as well be deaf. Ashley moved at twice their speed. She was faster, lighter, and more coordinated, even dragging Jeff along. She crossed from dirt paths to forested undergrowth with a grace and precision that Jeffrey found mesmerizing. The soldiers couldn't keep up with her, let alone identify her. They had drifted so far apart in the fog their command and control had completely deteriorated. Ashley took full advantage of the conditions and advanced on them at full speed, invisibly striking with such force that no one remained standing. She attacked from their sides and periphery. They didn't see her coming or going. Once she hit them, all they knew was that they were now broken. They shouted in pain. Their screams and poorly aimed shots added to the accelerating chaos. Ashley was everywhere and nowhere. She was every orphan and none of them. Soldiers continued to fall as the kids took up the fight. Weapon caches were looted and distributed, the children already moving in coordinated groups. Soldiers closed in from the back, unaware of what was going on up ahead, and launched tear gas canisters into the fray. In the confusion, many of the advanced troops had pulled off their helmets and gas masks to try and communicate better, and as the tear gas began to stain the fog with its yellow tint, they struggled to get their masks back on, most falling victims to it, like the children. Ashley twisted helmets, broke arms, and shattered knees with astonishing force. Soon she and Jeff had escaped. Even the sounds, the curses, shots, and screams grew faint and distant. Jeff looked at his sister with a new appreciation, but she didn't acknowledge the look. They found one of the protruding corridor hatches, a door at the base of a grass-covered mound set into the side of a tall berm. Ashley looked at the diagram map mounted next to the door. Making a mental calculation, she showed her brother, with a quick hand gesture, their direction. He nodded. "We have to run. You ready?" Jeff nodded again. Ash opened the hatch. The corridor beyond was clear. It stretched away and turned at an intersection ahead. They found tunnels leading away in 4 directions. Soon she and Jeffrey had crossed the entire level. They reached a corner stairwell on the other side and climbed from the bottom level to the top of the topmost stadium. It took the better part of 2 hours, but thankfully the area was utterly abandoned. All across the district, over the course of the morning, the search for Ashley widened. Soon all available officers were involved. Angered by the extra duties, the citizen soldiers vented their frustration on the unlucky orphans. 3 cafeterias descended into riots well before lunchtime. When Ash and Jeffrey finally went looking for a meal, the district had virtually melted down. Fights and riots consumed entire blocks. It was Monday, and no one had gone to class. Soldiers openly assaulted orphans all across the facility, beating them with their batons and indiscriminately firing less lethal pellets at the kids. Occasionally they demanded Ashley's whereabouts, but for the most part, they simply beat the children mercilessly. Outside a cafeteria, Ash and Jeff found a fight already in progress. A guard, only a few years older than Ash, held his baton over his head, yelling at one of the orphans. The kid was on his knees, his hands behind his back. His face was swollen and bloodied. He was crying, having trouble staying upright. He favored a broken shoulder and was obviously in intense pain. 3 other guards stood nearby, laughing and watching. Half a dozen others could be heard in the cafeteria, smashing up the room. "What did I tell you? I have a warrant. Do you understand that? I told you to keep your hands behind your back. Now you got yourself a broken arm, don't you? You lucky bastard." The guys standing nearby chimed in. "Old boy gonna pass out in 2 minutes," one laughed. "Ha! 10 Spot says he doesn't have a minute left." Ashley stepped up. "I bet he stays awake longer than you." Without waiting for them to acknowledge her remark, she stepped forward, took the bully's baton, and broke his arm in one smooth motion. She then stomped his kneecap, blasting it down the front of his shin, and delivered a stunning elbow to his temple. The eyeball ruptured and filled with blood. As he screamed and stumbled, the ruined orb swelled and bulged, then burst and leaked down his face. The remaining guards stood huddled together, terrified. Ashley struck the 2 outside guards with the baton, one in the throat, the other in the ear. Their heads collided with the man between them. Ash delivered several lightning-quick jabs to the center guard, and with her final strike she hit the men at the sides. All 3 men fell to the ground. The 24 guards inside the cafeteria caught wind of her arrival and rushed out to surround her. Ashley fought them off as long as she could. Jeffrey was pushed away with all the other orphans. He was not their priority. He was just another zero. After almost a dozen guards had been critically wounded in the line of duty, Ashley was finally subdued and restrained. Handcuffed and shackled, she was dragged away over the bodies of her victims. In only 2 encounters, Ashley had put 27 soldiers in critical condition. 13 others were also injured. The platoon dragged her through the facility like a trophy. Their comrades cleared a path with ruthless efficiency. Ash was taken directly to the Bolt's main elevator bank. They rode up to the district headquarters, where she was formally charged and processed. She was then dragged to a large open shower, stripped of her clothes, and blasted with water from a fire hose. They threw her a small towel, a set of hospital-thin scrubs, and dragged her to her cell. On the way, she saw the tall janitor again. She was sure it was the same man she'd seen after killing Donovan. He reminded her of a famous movie star, but she couldn't remember the actor's name. Before reaching their destination, Ashley passed out. The soldiers dragging her didn't notice. Ash later woke in her tiny iron cell. A thin mat lay on the floor. Through a small rectangle of thick reinforced glass in the door, she could see that the narrow block extended 3 stories up from her level. The filthy tile wall across from her cell reflected the above tiers. She could make out the catwalks of the 2nd and 3rd floors, empty of patrolling guards. The doors were all made of the same heavy red iron with imposing locks. Chapter 16. Lead Striker. When Jeff woke, he found himself in the medical ward, again. It was already late in the afternoon, the last few hours of sunlight. Jeff's stomach growled and he climbed out of bed. Across from him, slumped in a chair, Sky also woke. "I'm hungry," he said. "I'm starved," Sky agreed. In the cafeteria, Jeff and Sky sat next to each other on the bench and picked at their food, utterly uninterested. Sky looked over to Jeff. "Not hungry?" she asked. Jeff dropped his fork onto his tray and sniffled. He reached out to her and put his arms around the teen girl. In almost no time at all, they both began crying, leaning on each other. Across the room, Hambone saw them. He stood with Kaz, Jones, Rudy, and Taylor. They finished a few minutes ago and were leaving. They stood there, silent, looking at the ground. Other kids started to notice and started to stare. The guys watched Sky and Jeffrey crying, and with each passing moment, their fury grew. Violence seemed imminent. Soon the entire cafeteria was silent in respect for Sky and Jeff. Eventually they looked up. Assembled before them were some exceptionally angry teenagers. At first Skye was scared, but these were her friends standing before her. Kaz, Hambone, Jones, Rudy, and Taylor seemed angered by Skye and Jeff's emotional reaction. "What did we do? We were just crying," Skye said. Kaz stepped forward, nodded to Skye and Jeff, and then left the cafeteria. He looked angry enough to kill someone. A good number of kids went back to their food, but a bunch followed him out, curious. Lead striker Kazimov was going to do something. Skye and Jeff watched them stream out. Soon they were practically alone. A couple minutes later, several kids came rushing back into the cafeteria, asking for Skye and Jeff. They walked outside to discover a massive crowd. The kids stood with their backs to them, facing the screaming and yelling which could be heard from somewhere up ahead. The kids who'd come back to get them cleared a path. "It's her brother," they explained. The word brother rippled through the crowd, punctuated by requests for clarification, but the crowd parted. At the center, Kaz stood over a three-man patrol, shouting and waving a stun baton. The largest of the trio lay face down, bleeding from several head wounds. Kaz stood on the broken leg of another soldier who writhed in pain. An officer waited on his knees, his hands cuffed behind his back. Kaz wore the officer's handgun tucked into his belt. The weapon made the 15-year-old look 10 years older, as did the blood splashed across his arms, chest, and face. Skye noticed that the front audience members held most of the guards' gear, shields, helmets, batons. Kaz gestured with the baton to the radio in his other hand. He screamed into the radio, "Can you hear me now? You want to hear some more?" Kaz glared at the wounded soldier and increased the pressure on his broken leg. The soldier screamed. Kaz held the radio out for the citizen on the other end of the line. The radioman yelled, "How do I know you aren't just a bunch of kids who got a handset?" "I told you how I got it," Kaz replied. He increased the pressure on the guard's leg. The soldier instantly started screaming again. "I swear to God, if this is Jenkins, if this is you, I'm shifting 6 in your ass." Kazimov turned to Jeffrey. "What's your name, kid?" He held the handset out to him. Jeffrey Fox." "Okay. What's going on here, Jeff?" Looks like you beat these guards up. I think that one's dead." "He might be," Kaz laughed. "He might be at that." Kaz handed the bloody baton to Jeff, who took it warily. Kaz drew the light 9 and waited for a response from the soldier on the other end of the radio. "So what's your lucky number then, 0? The operator barked. "I am not a number," Kaz shouted. "I'm a free man," Jeffrey answered. "That's right, we're free men," he said into the radio. "And I'm going to tell you one more time, release Ashley Fox." "Not happening," the dispatch officer replied. Kaz tucked the pistol into his waistband and traded Jeff the radio for the baton. "Press the key." Kaz gestured for Jeff to key the mic and hold it out. He did. Kaz walked over to the broken-legged guard and kicked him in the face. "You want my number, huh?" Kaz yelled to the radio. He stood on the guard's broken leg and yelled to the microphone. "This is Officer Hodges you hear screaming. His number is 7262. Kaz kicked the officer and then began to hit him with the baton. After a full minute of beating, Kaz grew tired and paused. He looked over to the radio. "Did you get all that?" He took the badge. "That was Officer Hodges. Badge 7262. Kaz moved to hand Jeff the baton, but Jeff hesitated. It was covered in gore. Kaz gave it a few good raps on the ground and most of the bloody chunks fell off. Hodges began convulsing and foaming at the mouth. His eyes rolled back and went white. Kaz pushed the baton into Jeff's hands, distracting him from the dying soldier. Jeff took it and gave up the radio. On the other end, a great commotion could be heard. Several people talking, arguing. "Who's he kicking?" someone asked. "What guard?" Kaz rolled the other unconscious guard onto his back and pulled his badge from his chest. He then took the badge from the kneeling officer. "Let me talk to him," the older voice demanded, and then came on over the radio. "This is Major Watrous. Whom am I speaking to, please?" Kaz spoke into the handset. "If you release Ashley Fox, I'll let this last one live." "Who is this?" the major asked. "I've just sixed 2 of your citizens, and I'm about to make it 3. Kaz put the gun to the back of the kneeling officer's head and held the radio up to the man's mouth. "Tell Daddy your name, bitch." The subjugated guard kept his cool. "Sir, this is First Lieutenant Gray. Fleming is dead. Hodges is dying. I've been handcuffed and my weapon has been stolen." "Pull it together, man. I need you to stand your ground." the major barked. Kaz grinned and keyed the mic again, holding it before Gray's face. Sir, I'm not in any position to put up a fight. God damn, son, did you say those monkeys have a firearm? What the hell is going on down there? Sir, there's 300 kids here. Corporal Fleming hit a young girl and, well, it's become a rather serious issue now, sir. What the hell do you expect me to do about it, Corporal? Lieutenant, sir, my name is Lieutenant Gray. If you don't find a way out of this mess you've made, it's going to be inmate. Do you understand me, son? Wakari Maska. God damn it, do I have to speak another language for you? The major screamed from the communicator. Sumimasen, watashi wa wakarimasu gozaimasu. Gray answered, cool and level-headed. What the hell did you just say to me? I said, excuse me, I understand, sir. Well, you just hold fast, Captain. We're going to get you out of there. Let me talk at the screwball. Kaz and the other kids watched, impressed with the lieutenant's calm and fluid command in Nihongo. Listen up. I don't know who you think you're dealing with here. I'm dealing with the Colt Firearms Company, Kaz interrupted. He lifted the gun from the back of Gray's head and admired the weapon, reading the embossed type. Of the Light 9 variety, it would appear. Hey, look at that. That's really just how they spell it. The major's voice sounded weary. What the hell is it you hope to achieve with this little display? That's the trouble. No one listens until you do something drastic. Sometimes not even then. You haven't been listening, have you, Major Shitheel? I want Ashley Fox free right now. Kaz lowered the gun to the officer's head again. Right this very moment, in fact. In the headquarters, a dozen guards studied the 512 monitors. They switched between the A and B channels, scanning for the incident occurring over the radio. I'm holding my 9 to the back of this cat's head, and I swear I'm going to dust his cheese if you don't let her go. Dust his cheese? Hambone said, rolling his eyes and laughing. Kaz shrugged, grinning. Wait, just a second, please, son, don't hurt anyone. I'll get you whatever you need. The major seemed to have come to his senses. Whatever you need, I'm going to help you. Maybe we can get Miss Fox released. From what I understand, there are just some court proceedings to be followed. The major was stammering, stumbling through his words. Did you know she's going to have a hearing and a fair trial? Did you know that? Now listen to me, it's all very legal and all that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Please don't shoot the lieutenant. That's First Lieutenant Gray there. He's one of the good guys. Come on, now I know he's cooperated with you. Just let the lieutenant go. We'll sort everything out. More noise in the background. It sounded as if the other guards were explaining the situation to the major. Ashley who? The muffled major asked. The girl from the fights, a young soldier answered. What fights? The pit fights. She won. She killed Kid Lethal. The hot girl? That was this district? The colonel had her arrested. For what? Murder, the soldier answered. It was self-defense, even I know that. She's a goddamn hero. Kids all over the country love her. My own goddamn kids love her. Has the colonel lost his mind? Kaz interrupted their not-so-silent background conversation. I'm going to shoot this man in the back of the head and blow his face off. Kaz set the weapon directly against the back of Gray's head and addressed him directly. You hear that? Closed casket for you, buddy. Kaz cocked the pistol. Gray closed his eyes. Kaz keyed the radio again. Major Watrous, what's it gonna be? Yes or no? Release Ashley Fox right this very second. Well, now just hold on a second. These things take time. That sounds like a no. Inside the command center, the major and the other soldiers were startled by the sound of a gunshot from over the radio. I've got like 1,000 more bullets in this gun. I suggest you release her before I find some more of your guards, Kaz snapped. The radio erupted with a horrible screeching feedback from the stomped handset. The major and the other officers covered their ears until one of the techs turned the volume down. On the athletic block outside the cafeteria, the radio lay smashed to bits. Gray lay on his side, his head bloodied but intact. A couple moments later he came to and sat up. Kaz squatted next to him, holding the weapon in one hand and the cuffs in the other. Gray's hands were free. Lucky you, Kaz smiled. What happened? Gray asked. I pulled the trigger, but I guess I missed. I don't know what happened. Anyhow, you're okay. Looks like the bullet grazed your grape a little, but you're fine. Genuine battle scar. Gray touched the top of his head. His hand came away wet with blood. Kaz helped him to his feet. All the kids stood by, holding their newly seized riot gear, waiting for the signal to beat the standing guard into mush. Gray saw the badges pinned to Kaz's shirt. his own among them. He considered his options. The lieutenant moved to exit the ring of fierce children, but they stood firm against him and didn't open the circle. Kaz waved his hand, gesturing for the kids to let Gray go. "Good day, citizen," Kaz said. "Good luck." Gray counted his blessings and exited through the sea of growling orphans. Hambone stood next to Kaz. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "Letting him go?" Kaz replied. "No, killing them." He gestured to the dead soldiers. "They're not dead," Kaz explained. "Besides, I got 3 badges and a 9. What have you got? After they're through with you, another dead friend." Kaz kicked Fleming. He beat the shit out of 3 kids, just this week. Then he kicked Hodges, eliciting a fresh set of convulsions. "As far as I'm concerned, if they're walking around here dressed for battle, then I'm going to give them one." "But we're going to lose, idiot. They've got the guns," Hambone said. "We've got the numbers," Kazmov winked. Hambone glared. "What are you going to do? Wait for another Supergirl to come along and start breaking heads? If you want something done, do it yourself. You can't just wait, hope, and worry." Rudy held up a fist. "Amen, brother," he said. "Fuck you, Rude," Hambone replied. Rudy spoke loudly for the whole crowd. "I don't call it violence. When it's in self-defense, I call it intelligence." His words rolled through the crowd, partially repeated with choruses of laughter. "Give peace a chance, Buddha," Hambone countered. "I've not yet begun to fight," Kaz yelled, raising the weapon into the air. The kids cheered. "Are all of you retarded?" Hambone had to get loud to be heard over the noise. "Have you lost your minds? They will destroy us. Not just some of us, but all of us." Kaz backed up a step. "Okay, fine. For the sake of argument, I screwed up. I can't declare war on all of Angel City by myself. But don't you think you could offer something constructive, maybe?" Hambone rolled his eyes. Kazmov stepped forward. "Look, Ben Franklin ain't on the talent for nothing. Stand together or hang apart." Hambone looked at the bashed and bleeding guards, and then at the waiting crowd of kids. "Man, we gotta move them over to the elevators." Ham gestured to the younger orphans nearby. "Set up lookouts and diversions." The kids stood there, staring at the mess, perhaps waiting for Kazmov to ratify Hambone's instructions. Kaz, however, was not the leader of the Iron Fist, and in Tanaka's absence, Hambone held the reins. "Now!" he ordered. The kids scattered. They knew these procedures well. Scouts positioned themselves at key points and supplied a steady stream of information. Kaz and crew would have no trouble avoiding the patrols. Kaz and Ham, assisted by Jones, Rudy, and Taylor, lifted the guards by their shoulders, belts, and legs. They carried the bodies over the fields toward the elevators at the center of the level. The lookouts ahead signaled that it wasn't clear. The carriers paused, setting the broken citizens down behind a berm and kneeling beside them. Hodges began to moan. Jones beat him back into unconsciousness. Ahead of them, the younger kids harassed the posted elevator guards with rocks. They continued pelting them until they couldn't take it anymore and gave pursuit. Once the guards were gone, the younger kids disconnected the level's camera feeds by accessing a panel running alongside the elevator shaft. The gang leaders dragged the unconscious men to the elevator bank. When they reached the doors, Hambone had the guys set the bodies against them. The kids propped up the critically injured citizens so that when the doors next opened, the bodies would naturally fall in. Kaz hit the button and the elevator car began its approach. "What if someone's in there?" Hambone whispered. "Fuck it," Kaz said, drawing the weapon from his waistband. The boy stood alone in front of the carriage doors. His friends crouched behind cement structures and pressed up against the walls. The elevator arrived. Kaz took a deep breath and swallowed. The doors slid open. The car was empty. The bodies leaning against the doors fell into the empty car with 2 distinct thuds. Kaz tucked the pistol into his belt and stepped forward to push the soldiers the rest of the way into the car. Soon they'd moved the guards into sitting positions against the half-closed doors. Kaz hit the red cross button and they climbed out. "This isn't going to work," Hambone said as they made the final adjustments. "Mr. Positivity," Kaz replied, holding the unconscious guards back as the doors closed. A moment later and the wounded men were gone. The kids laughed as they drifted away from the elevator bank. "We have to call council," Hambone said. "What? Why?" Kaz asked. Hambone turned to rebound Rudy, Jones, and Taylor. "That's the deal. We have to. We promised," Ham said. "Why?" Kaz asked. After the last riots, we all promised that if any Zero ever got their hands on a heater, we promised to let each other know. What kind of stupid shit is that? That was almost 3 years ago. And besides, you aren't even in the gang anyhow, I know, Hambone said. And besides, I'm not even in the... Fuck you, Ham. Whatever, Hambone replied. You're gonna let Dante know, Kasimov asked. I give my word, I keep my word. I'm gonna let him know. You're such a bitch, Hambone, Kaz sighed. You can't have it both ways, Stryker. Besides, it's only you and your wannabe sponsors who think you're not in anyhow. I'm not in. You don't take a cut. That's not quite the same thing. And now you're packing. So if you're not a gang member, you're a terrorist. Fine, let's have a war then, Kaz snapped. Hambone smiled. Load the cannons, we got the gold. Kaz laughed. We need to get us some Terrellium vests and a bunch of machetes.